All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
If you're getting ready to tackle that UPSC exam,
Right.
especially with international relations
Yeah.
as your optional,
Yeah.
you really got to wrap your head around some of these, like,
Oh, yeah.
big ideas of political philosophy.
Big time.
Because it can really, like, boost your understanding
For sure.
of how global politics actually works.
Absolutely.
And today, we're going to time travel
Okay.
back to the French Revolution
Right.
to kind of unpack the radically different views
Okay.
of these two thinkers,
Yeah.
Edmund Burke and Mary Wollstonecraft.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah. So what we find is that their reactions to the revolution reveal two totally different approaches to like how societies function,
right,
how much power individuals should have,
right,
even how we think about progress itself.
right. Like they're looking at the same explosion of change,
Yeah.
but through totally different lenses.
Exactly.
So, like, why should this matter to someone who's, like, aiming for a top score on the UPSC?
Well, think about it this way. The issues they debated, individual rights versus tradition, the role of property in creating a fair society, the whole question of equality, these are themes that echo throughout history
Yeah.
and are central to international relations today.
Okay, so it's like understanding the DNA
Yeah.
of global politics.
It is.
Okay, so let's paint the scene for us.
Okay.
Like France is in chaos, the Bastille has fallen.
Right.
Everyone is talking about like liberty, equality, fraternity.
Yeah.
But then Edmund Burke comes along, and he's not exactly like cheering, is he?
No, Burke was horrified by the French Revolution.
Yeah.
He believed in slow, gradual change,
Okay.
respecting long-standing institutions and the existing social order.
Right.
The revolution to him was like ripping apart the very fabric of society.
So he wasn't like against change itself,
No.
but more like let's pump the brakes a bit.
Exactly. He was afraid of the unintended consequences of such a radical upheaval. And he made his views very clear in his book, Reflections on the Revolution in France,
Right.
which sparked huge debates all across Europe.
And that's where Mary Wollstonecraft enters the picture, right?
Exactly.
Ready to go head to head
Yeah.
with Burke's ideas and her response
Uh-huh.
of vindication of the rights of woman.
Right.
That's like a landmark feminist text.
It is.
But she didn't stop there, did she?
No, she went much further.
Right.
Wollstonecraft fundamentally disagreed with Burke's entire worldview.
Okay.
To her, clinging to tradition was just a way to keep the powerful in
Right.
charge and everyone else stuck in their place.
Yeah.
She believed in natural rights, the idea that everyone, regardless of their background, is born with certain rights to liberty and equality.
And she even went and criticized Burke's earlier book on aesthetics, a
Okay.
philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and beautiful,
Right.
for reinforcing stereotypes about men and women.
Yeah.
And, she saw a connection between these seemingly unrelated ideas and how they actually, like, supported inequality in the real world.
That's a key point.
Right.
Wollstonecraft was brilliant at showing how seemingly separate ideas about art, beauty, and gender roles
Uh-huh.
could actually prop up systems of power and oppression.
Right.
That kind of insight is gold for anyone studying international relations.
Yeah.
Understanding the interplay of culture, ideology, and power dynamics is so crucial.
Okay, so we've got, like, Burke on one side of, like, slow, careful change.
Right.
And then Wollstonecraft, who was, like, pushing for this, like, radical transformation based on these natural rights.
Exactly.
It sounds like a head-on collision.
It is.
But where do they clash most fiercely?
One of their biggest disagreements was about property.
Okay, property.
Burke considered property rights to be sacred,
Uh-huh.
a cornerstone of social stability.
Oh.
Wollstonecraft, however, saw private property as a source of immense inequality.
Okay.
She went so far as to call it demonic.
Wow, demonic.
It was a very radical statement for the time,
Yeah.
but it reveals just how deeply she believed that wealth disparities were blocking true liberty and social harmony.
So she was, like, anticipating some of these critiques of capitalism that would come later.
Yes, and it's an argument that's still incredibly relevant today.
Right.
As we grapple with issues like global wealth inequality and the concentration of power in the hands of a select few.
Okay.
It shows how deeply Wollstonecraft's thinking was connected to economic justice.
So if I'm getting this right, like, for Wollstonecraft, it wasn't enough to just, like, tweak the system
No.
a bit. She was calling for a fundamental shift
Yes.
in how we think about power and resources.
Exactly.
But how did Burke respond to this?
Burke stood firm in his belief that hereditary systems provided a natural and stable basis for leadership.
Okay.
He argued that those born into positions of authority were best suited to govern,
Right.
having inherited wisdom and experience from previous generations.
It's interesting how Burke saw tradition as a safeguard against, like, chaos and mob rule.
Yeah.
He believed that, like, upending the social hierarchy would throw everything into disarray.
Exactly.
But, of course, Wollstonecraft had a completely different take.
Absolutely. She pointed out how often hereditary systems promote incompetent leaders simply because of their birthright.
Yeah.
She believed that true leadership should be based on merit and talent,
Right.
not just on who your parents are.
And this whole debate about inherited privilege versus a meritocracy,
Yes,
it's still so relevant today.
it is.
You know, we see it in discussions about social mobility and equality of opportunity.
Yeah.
It's like these arguments from, like, centuries ago are still playing out on the global stage.
Absolutely, and that's why understanding the historical roots of these debates is crucial for the UPSC.
Yeah.
It gives you that deeper context to analyze contemporary issues in international relations.
So we're not just memorizing facts here.
No.
We're learning how to think like political philosophers.
Exactly.
Like we're training for intellectual combat.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've got Wollstonecraft challenging Burke
Uh-huh.
on tradition,
Uh-huh.
property, this whole idea of hereditary privilege.
Yes.
But there's this other huge piece in this puzzle,
Right.
and that's her focus on women's rights, which is basically absent from Burke's writings.
Yeah.
And it's almost shocking to think that just a few centuries ago,
I know.
women's voices were so marginalized.
It's a stark reminder of how much progress has been made in the fight for gender equality,
Right.
but also how much work still remains to be done.
Yeah.
Wollstonecraft was scathing in her criticism of Burke's portrayal of women as delicate
Right.
and irrational,
Yeah.
unfit for reason or intellectual
It
pursuit.
sounds absurd now.
It does.
But you know, those were the prevailing views back then.
They were.
So how did Wollstonecraft challenge these deeply ingrained notions?
She argued passionately that women, just like men,
Okay.
have the capacity for reason,
Mhm.
independent thought,
Right.
and intellectual achievement.
Okay.
In fact, she saw the French Revolution as a potential turning point. Okay.
For women's emancipation, even drawing inspiration from figures like Condorcet and Olympe de Gouges.
Wait, there were others pushing for similar ideas?
Yeah.
Tell me more about them.
Condorcet was a brilliant mathematician and philosopher
Okay.
who argued for women's suffrage, the right to vote, and equal access to education.
Okay.
He saw denying women these rights as a violation of natural justice
Yeah.
and harmful to society as a whole.
So for him, like, gender equality wasn't just about fairness.
Right.
It was about progress for everyone.
Precisely.
Okay.
And then there was Olympe de Gouges,
Okay.
a playwright and political activist who actually rewrote the Declaration of the Rights of Man to include women.
Wow, imagine the audacity
I know, right?
in the midst of a revolution.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was a radical act that unfortunately led to her execution during the Reign of Terror.
Oh, wow, that's tragic
It is.
that she paid such a high price for her beliefs.
It is.
But you know, it's a reminder of how dangerous it can be to challenge the status quo.
But also incredibly inspiring to see these women
Yeah,
fighting for change, even when facing those risks.
absolutely. Their courage should remind us that the fight for equality and justice often requires tremendous sacrifice,
Yeah.
and that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us.
Right.
But let's bring the focus back to Wollstonecraft's specific critique of Burke.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
What exactly did she find so objectionable about his views on women?
Yeah.
Wollstonecraft found Burke's romanticized and idealized view of women to be incredibly patronizing.
Okay.
He praised their beauty and delicate sensibility,
Uh-huh.
but in doing so, he reinforced the very stereotypes that kept women confined to limited roles in society.
So he was like trapping women in a cage of compliments.
Exactly. He saw women as ornaments of society,
Right.
meant to be admired, but not to participate fully in intellectual or political life.
Okay.
Wollstonecraft, on the other hand, saw this view as utterly unjust and limiting.
Yeah.
Right.
She believed women were capable of so much more. And her critique aligns perfectly with her broader argument about natural rights and progress.
Mm-hmm.
Denying women these rights was just another symptom of a society that failed to recognize the inherent dignity and potential of all individuals,
Yes.
regardless of gender.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
For Wollstonecraft, the fight for women's rights was intricately connected to the larger fight for a more just and equitable society.
Right.
And this interconnectedness of social justice issues is a vital lesson for anyone studying international relations.
It's mind-blowing how Wollstonecraft manages to connect these, like, seemingly separate issues.
I know.
Art, property rights, women's rights. It's like she's weaving a tapestry of social justice.
She is.
With her ideas, she truly was ahead of her time.
She was, but she wasn't the only one challenging Burke's ideas.
Oh, okay.
Thinkers like Thomas Paine,
Right.
author of Common Sense, and a key figure in both the American and French revolutions, also entered the fray.
Ah, yes. Thomas Paine?
Uh,
How did his critique of Burke compare to Wollstonecraft's?
Like, Wollstonecraft Paine saw Burke's reverence for tradition and defense of the existing social order as deeply flawed.
Right.
He was particularly critical of things like inadequate parliamentary representation and primogeniture,
Right.
the system where the eldest son inherits everything, further concentrating wealth and power.
So he was essentially pushing for a more democratic system.
Yes.
Where ordinary citizens had a real voice.
Exactly. Both Wollstonecraft and Paine were advocating for profound social and political change, really shaking the foundations of power as it existed at the time.
And it's incredible how these ideas from the 18th century still resonate so powerfully today.
They do.
They've shaped so many political movements and social reforms that we take for granted now.
Absolutely. And that's precisely why it's so important for you
Right.
as UPSC aspirants, particularly those focusing on international relations, to understand these debates. They provide the context and the intellectual framework to grasp the complex challenges facing our world today.
So we've covered so much ground already.
We have.
We've got Burke, defending tradition, Wollstonecraft and Paine, pushing for this radical change. The French Revolution as this backdrop of both, like, chaos and possibility.
It is.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
But before we move on,
Okay.
there's something else about the French Revolution
Okay.
that often gets overlooked.
All right.
You know, it's often hailed as this turning point for freedom.
Right.
But how did it actually impact women's rights?
That's a great question. And while the French Revolution had lofty ideals of liberty and equality, it didn't automatically translate into complete emancipation for women.
Really?
In fact, in some ways, it actually rolled back certain rights women had under the Ancien regime.
Oh, wow. That's surprising.
Yeah.
What kind of rights are we talking about?
Well, for example, under the Ancien regime, noble women who owned land had rights similar to feudal lords. They could raise taxes, administer justice.
Wow.
Even participate in political life to a limited extent.
Okay.
But the revolution, with its focus on the rights of male citizens, swept many of these rights away.
So in some ways, the revolution was a step backward for certain women.
In some respects, yes.
Wow.
But it's crucial to remember that the revolution also unleashed a wave of feminist activism and intellectual debate.
Right.
Thinkers like Wollstonecraft, Condorcet, and de Gouges wouldn't have had the same platform without it.
Okay.
The revolution, despite its flaws, planted the seeds for future advancements in women's rights.
So it's a powerful reminder that progress isn't always a straight line.
No.
And revolutions can have unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And that's a vital insight for anyone studying international relations.
Yeah.
Revolutions and social movements can be incredibly complex, often leading to outcomes that differ from the initial goals.
Right.
You need to look beyond the surface to truly understand the ripple effects of change.
Okay, my brain is officially doing backflips with all these ideas.
It's a lot to take in.
We've gone from Burke's defensive tradition to Wollstonecraft's vision of radical equality. And we've only just scratched the surface.
We have. There's always more to uncover.
Right.
But hopefully we've laid a solid foundation for you to continue exploring these ideas and thinkers.
I'm already feeling like intellectually stimulated.
Good.
But for now, let's take a breather.
Okay.
We'll be back soon with part 2 to dive even deeper into the legacies of Burke and Wollstonecraft.
Right.
And we'll explore how their ideas continue to shape our understanding of international relations today.
Sounds good.
So don't forget to subscribe and like for more deep dives into topics that will give you an edge in your UPSC exam.
Great advice. Welcome back to our deep dive into revolutionary thought. We've been exploring those contrasting worldviews of Edmund Burke and Mary Wollstonecraft and how their reactions to the French Revolution laid bare some fundamental tensions in how we think about society and progress.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride so far. You know, we've seen how Burke clung to tradition while Wollstonecraft demanded radical change. Right. And how their clashing ideas about property rights and even women's roles still resonate today.
They do. It's crazy.
And as we move into this next part of our discussion,
Okay.
I want us to consider the lasting legacies of these two thinkers.
Okay.
How did their ideas shape the course of history, and how do they continue to influence our understanding of international relations in the 21st century?
That's a big question.
It is.
Their arguments were sparked by a revolution over 200 years ago.
Yeah.
So how do we even begin to trace their impact all the way to the present?
Let's start with Burke. His ideas about tradition, social order, and the dangers of rapid change became the foundation for what we now call conservatism.
Right, conservatism.
His writings have shaped generations of thinkers and politicians who believe in preserving existing institutions and values.
So even though he was writing in the 18th century, Burke's ideas still speak to those who advocate for a more cautious approach to change. Absolutely. His emphasis on inherited wisdom, the fragility of social order, and the need for gradual reform still resonates with many conservative thinkers today,
Okay.
even on the global stage.
And I can see how that applies to international relations.
Yeah.
Burke would probably warn against rash interventions
Yeah.
or trying to force democracy on countries without considering their history and culture.
Precisely, Burke's legacy is a cautionary tale about the law of unintended consequences.
Right.
He reminds us that dismantling existing structures without carefully thinking through the potential fallout
Yeah.
can lead to instability and even tyranny.
Right.
That's a lesson that's especially relevant in the realm of international relations,
Okay.
where even small actions can have huge ripple effects around the world.
It makes you wonder what Burke would think about some of the recent political upheavals.
It does.
We've seen the Arab Spring, the rise of populism, the resurgence of nationalism.
Yeah.
These are all movements that challenge the established order in different ways.
They are. It's fascinating to imagine how he might apply his ideas to these modern-day challenges. I suspect he would urge caution and a focus on maintaining stability above all else.
So Burke's legacy is one of prudence respecting the past.
Yes.
And understanding the complexities of change.
Right.
But what about Wollstonecraft?
Yeah.
How have her ideas fared in the centuries since the French Revolution?
Wollstonecraft's legacy is equally profound, though perhaps even more complex and multifaceted.
Okay.
Her writings have been a source of inspiration for generations of feminists and social justice advocates, shaping their understanding of equality, individual rights, and the need for systemic change.
And it wasn't just about women's rights, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Wollstonecraft's critique of inequality extended to all forms of injustice,
Right.
including economic disparities
Yes.
and the plight of the working class.
She was fighting for everyone who was marginalized and oppressed.
So she was like a true radical,
She was.
in the sense that she challenged the very foundations of power and privilege.
Yeah.
She demanded a more just and equitable society for all, regardless of gender, class, or any other arbitrary division.
Exactly.
And her ideas about natural rights, the importance of reason and education,
Yeah.
and this idea that different forms of social justice are all interconnected.
Right.
They're still so relevant today.
Absolutely. Think about the movements we see around the world, fighting for racial justice, economic equality, LGBTQ plus rights, and environmental sustainability.
Right.
All of these movements echo the principles. Wollstonecraft championed the belief that everyone deserves the opportunity to live a life of dignity and to reach their full potential.
It's amazing to think about how one woman's voice, raised during such a tumultuous period, could have such a lasting impact on the world.
It's incredible. It truly speaks to the enduring power of ideas
Right.
and the courage it takes to challenge injustice.
Yeah.
Her story is a reminder that individuals can make a difference, even when they're fighting against seemingly insurmountable odds.
So in a way, Burke and Wollstonecraft represent these two contrasting but interconnected strands of modern political thought.
They do.
Burke's emphasis on tradition and order serves as a counterpoint to Wollstonecraft's radical vision of equality and social justice.
Right, and this tension between preserving the past and striving for a better future
Yeah.
is at the heart of so many challenges we face in international relations.
So how do we balance the need for stability with the pursuit of greater justice and equality?
That's the question.
How do we learn from history without being trapped by it?
It's like they're offering us two different lenses through which to view the world,
Right.
each with its own strengths and limitations.
And by engaging with both perspectives, by considering both the need for caution and the imperative for change, we can develop a more nuanced understanding of the complex challenges facing our world.
We can.
Okay, so let's bring this back to our UPSC aspirants.
Right.
Why is it so important for them to understand this historical debate,
Okay.
especially if they're focusing on international relations?
Because the UPSC exam isn't just about knowing facts and figures.
Right.
It's about demonstrating critical thinking
Yeah, correct.
and analytical skills.
Right.
It's about being able to evaluate different perspectives and construct well-reasoned arguments.
So studying figures like Burke and Wollstonecraft isn't just about learning about the past.
No, it's not.
It's about equipping yourself with the intellectual tools to understand the present
Yes,
and to think critically about the future.
exactly. Burke and Wollstonecraft force us to confront fundamental questions about power, justice, the nature of society, the very questions that lie at the heart of international relations.
They're like intellectual sparring partners pushing us to think harder and to develop our own informed opinions.
And here's a key piece of advice for you.
Okay.
As you're studying for the UPSC,
Right.
don't just study these thinkers in isolation.
Okay.
Connect their ideas to contemporary events,
Yeah.
to the current debates in international relations, to real-world examples that demonstrate their enduring relevance.
So instead of just memorizing their arguments,
Right.
we should be asking ourselves, how would Burke and Wollstonecraft approach a current issue, like, say, the conflict in Ukraine or the global refugee crisis?
Exactly. By putting their ideas into conversation with current events,
Right.
you'll gain a much deeper understanding of how these historical debates continue to shape the world we live in.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening discussion.
It has.
I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for how these ideas from centuries ago are still so relevant today.
They are.
Me too.
And I hope our listeners are feeling equally inspired to dig deeper into the works of Burke and Wollstonecraft.
So hold on.
Okay.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Right.
I want to make sure we circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
How did Wollstonecraft's focus on women's rights shape her understanding of the French Revolution itself?
That's an excellent point. Unlike many of her contemporaries, Wollstonecraft saw the revolution as an opportunity to fight for women's emancipation.
Okay.
She was inspired by other feminist voices in France, like Condorcet and Olympe de Gouges. And she believed that the revolution's ideals of liberty and equality should extend to women as well.
So she wasn't just focused on, like, overthrowing a king?
No.
She was challenging the entire system of patriarchy that kept women subordinate?
Precisely. For Wollstonecraft, the fight for women's rights was inextricably linked to the broader struggle for a more just and equitable society.
Right.
She understood that true liberty and equality could not be achieved
Right.
if half of humanity was denied basic rights and opportunities.
So she was essentially saying that the principles of the revolution, if truly applied,
Yeah,
demanded a radical rethinking of gender roles and power dynamics.
they did.
That's a powerful insight,
It is.
and it has had a huge impact on feminist thought ever since.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Wollstonecraft's writings laid the groundwork for generations of feminists who would build upon her arguments and continue the fight for gender equality.
It's striking how she connected her ideas about women's emancipation
Yeah.
to her broader critique of social injustice and her vision of a more egalitarian world.
And it's a reminder that social justice movements are often interconnected, and progress in one area can pave the way for progress in others.
Yeah, it's like we're seeing a pattern here.
Yeah,
Both Burke and Wollstonecraft challenge us to think critically about the world,
right.
but in very different ways.
They do.
Burke urges caution and respect for tradition,
Mm-hmm.
while Wollstonecraft calls for radical change and a relentless pursuit of equality.
You've captured the essence of their contributions perfectly.
Yeah.
And for you as UPSC aspirants, it's essential to grapple with both of these perspectives. They offer invaluable insights that can help you navigate the complexities of international relations
Right.
and develop your own nuanced understanding of the challenges facing our world.
So it's not about, like, choosing sides,
No.
but about understanding the strengths and limitations of each perspective and using those insights to analyze complex issues.
Precisely. By engaging with these contrasting viewpoints,
Right.
you'll become more informed citizens, more astute analysts, and ultimately more effective agents of change in a world that desperately needs it.
This has been such an enriching discussion.
It has.
I feel like we've only just begun to explore the depths of Burke and Wollstonecraft's ideas and how they continue to resonate in the 21st century.
And I have a feeling our listeners are eager to continue this exploration as well. But
Yeah.
for now, we'll have to take a pause.
But don't worry, everyone.
Okay.
We'll be back soon with part 3, where we'll explore how the legacies of Burke and Wollstonecraft continue to shape the debates about international relations that are happening right now.
Sounds good.
So make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. All right, welcome back, everyone, for the final part of our deep dive. We've been talking about Edmund Burke and Mary Wollstonecraft, and it's been quite a journey
It has.
from the streets of 18th century Paris to, the globalized world we're living in today.
Yeah, and what's striking is how relevant their ideas still are, especially for those of you gearing up for the UPSC International Relations paper.
Okay, so for this last part of our deep dive, let's connect all of this back to the UPSC exam.
Okay.
How do these debates from, centuries ago
Right.
actually help us understand the 21st century world?
Right.
What's for our aspiring diplomats and policymakers?
Here's where it gets really exciting. Think about the major issues in international relations today. The rise of nationalism debates about intervening in other countries, the tension between human rights and state sovereignty, the challenges of global governance in a world where power is shifting.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. These are all issues that force us to grapple with these fundamental questions about power, authority, individual rights,
Yeah.
and the very nature of the international system.
They are.
And those are the same questions that Burke and Wollstonecraft were wrestling with
Right.
during the French Revolution.
Precisely. For example, Burke's emphasis on respecting tradition and established institutions is relevant to current debates about the legitimacy of international organizations like the UN.
Right.
His warnings about the unintended consequences of rapid change are crucial when considering interventions in foreign conflicts where good intentions can sometimes lead to instability and unintended harm.
So Burke's legacy is this call for careful consideration
Yes.
on the global stage.
Yeah.
It reminds us to think about the complexities of history and culture
Right.
and to be wary of those quick fix solutions that might actually backfire.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that change, especially in the international arena, can be like a domino effect.
Exactly.
Mm.
On the other hand, Wollstonecraft's emphasis on natural rights and social justice has been incredibly influential in the development of international human rights law.
Okay.
Her writings challenge us to think about the moral dimension of international relations,
Right.
to advocate for a more just world order where the dignity and rights of all people are respected.
So Wollstonecraft's legacy is about holding states accountable for their actions,
Yes.
challenging systems of oppression, and working towards a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive regardless of where they're born or what their background is.
You've captured it perfectly.
Yeah.
And for those of you preparing for the UPSC,
Yeah.
understanding these contrasting viewpoints is crucial for crafting well-informed and nuanced arguments about current events.
So when you're analyzing a complex international issue,
Right.
if it's a territorial dispute, a humanitarian crisis, or a trade negotiation,
Yeah.
ask yourself, how might Burke approach this?
Right?
What would Wollstonecraft's perspective be?
By considering both of those lenses, you'll develop a more holistic understanding of the issue at hand. You'll be able to see the different angles, weigh the potential consequences of different actions, and ultimately form your own well-supported arguments.
It's like Burke and Wollstonecraft are giving you a mental toolkit for dissecting these complex global problems.
Exactly.
They're your intellectual sparring partners,
Right.
pushing you to think harder and deeper.
And here's one final piece of advice for our UPSC warriors.
Okay.
Don't just study these thinkers in a vacuum. Connect their ideas to real-world events. Think about how they would view current challenges like climate change, global inequality, the rise of authoritarianism.
So, for instance, would Burke emphasize the need for slow, gradual change in addressing climate change,
Yeah.
while Wollstonecraft calls for bolder, more radical action?
Right, or how would they assess the growing tensions between the U.S. and China?
Okay.
Would Burke see it as a threat to the existing world order, while Wollstonecraft might view it as an opportunity to challenge Western dominance and create a more multipolar world?
These are the kinds of questions that will not only deepen your understanding of Burke and Wollstonecraft, but also sharpen your analytical skills and prepare you to tackle even the toughest UPSC questions.
Exactly. Remember, the UPSC exam is not just about knowing the facts. It's about showing that you can think critically and apply different theoretical frameworks to complex real-world situations.
It's about showing that you're not just memorizing information,
Right.
but that you can actually engage with ideas and use them to make sense of the world around you.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying these thinkers so rewarding. It's not just about passing an exam. It's about developing the intellectual skills and the understanding of history and political thought that will serve you well throughout your career, whether you become a diplomat, a policy analyst, or any other kind of global change maker.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From Burke's defense of tradition to Wollstonecraft's radical vision,
Yeah.
and all the way to how their ideas can help us understand the challenges of the 21st century.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you all.
And remember, the journey of learning never truly ends. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing yourself to think critically about the world. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your fellow UPSC warriors.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.
And best of luck on your UPSC journey.